They told us the American demons would eat our children, but when the first cowboy stepped off that plane, he offered my daughter chocolate. What happened next would change 50,000 Japanese lives forever. August 30th, 1945. At Tsugi Airfield, 30 miles southwest of Tokyo. The air tasted of ash and aviation fuel. 14-year-old Yuki Tanaka crouched behind the twisted metal skeleton of a Mitsubishi bomber, her mother's hand crushing her own. The sky hung low and grey, pregnant with the weight of surrender. For weeks, the Emperor's voice had crackled through radios across the empire, a sound like a dying god announcing the unthinkable. Japan had lost. The war was over. Now the conquerors were coming. The sound arrived before the sight. 4 massive engines, deeper and more powerful than any aircraft Yuki had ever heard. The C-54 Skymaster descended through the clouds like a mechanical whale, impossibly huge, impossibly real. On its tail, the white star of America, the mark of the enemy, the symbol of the Oni, the demons. Yuki had seen their faces on every street corner for 4 years. Propaganda posters peeling from bombed-out walls showed them clearly. Fanged monsters with horns curving from their skulls, clawed hands dripping with Japanese blood, eyes that burned with an unholy hunger for violence and violation. The radio broadcasts had been even worse. American soldiers, the announcers said, would boil children alive for entertainment. They would defile every woman. They would desecrate every shrine and temple. They would turn the sacred islands of Japan into a playground of unspeakable horrors. Yuki's hands trembled as the Skymaster's wheels kissed the scarred runway with shocking gentleness. The engines wound down to a whisper. Silence fell across the airfield like a burial shroud. A few hundred Japanese soldiers and officials stood in rigid formation near the aircraft. Their uniforms hung loose on frames hollowed out by years of rationed rice and bitter defeat. Their faces were pale masks, carefully blank. They were small men, made smaller by the vast grey sky and the shadow of the American plane. They were the remnants of an empire that had promised divine victory and delivered only ashes. The door of the Skymaster opened. A ramp extended. For one endless moment, nothing moved. Yuki held her breath until her lungs burned. Her mother's prayer became a thin, desperate whisper beside her. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from inside the aircraft. He was tall, taller than any Japanese man Yuki had ever seen. He wore a simple khaki uniform, unbuttoned casually at the collar. Dark spectacles hid his eyes. He moved with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never known fear, never known hunger, never known defeat. This was General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander. The man who now ruled Japan with more power than the Emperor himself. But it was not the general who held Yuki's gaze. It was the men who followed him down the ramp. Soldiers of the 11th Airborne Division, the first American combat troops to set foot on the Japanese homeland. They moved with a looseness that was utterly alien to Yuki's eyes. Their bodies swayed with an easy rolling gait. They carried M1 rifles, but they held them casually, almost lazily. Not the rigid ceremonial stiffness of the Imperial Army. These men looked bored. They looked like they were arriving at a job site, not conquering a nation. And they were chewing. All of them. A rhythmic circular motion of the jaw. Gum. A casual, decadent, impossible luxury. As if they had so much of everything that they could afford to chew something with no nutrition, no purpose except pleasure. One of them, a young sergeant with hair the color of wheat straw, caught Yuki's eye from 50 yards away. He did not leer. He did not scowl or sneer. He offered a slight nod, almost imperceptible, then looked away. scanning the devastation with the appraising gaze of a man taking inventory. He was huge. His shoulders seemed wide enough to block out the sun. In a nation of men worn down by war and starvation, men who averaged 5 feet 4 inches in height, these Americans were a different species entirely. They were healthy, their skin was clear and tanned, their bodies filled out with years of beef and milk and bread. They looked like they had never known hunger. They looked, Yuki thought with a jolt of pure undiluted shock, like the men in the forbidden American movies her uncle used to project on a sheet in his basement before the military police took him away. They looked like cowboys. A small boy, no older than 5, broke away from his mother's grip. He toddled forward on unsteady legs, driven by a child's fearless curiosity and the magnetic pull of the impossible. A Japanese officer stiffened his hand, twitching toward the useless sword at his belt. But before he could move, one of the American soldiers, a corporal with a thick neck and a surprisingly kind face, crouched down. He reached into his pocket. The crowd inhaled sharply. A weapon. A grenade. The final cruelty before the occupation truly began. He pulled out a small brown rectangle wrapped in silver paper. A Hershey's chocolate bar. The corporal unwrapped it with care, broke off a piece and offered it to the boy. The child stared. Then tentatively tiny fingers reached out and took the chocolate, put it in his mouth, tasted it. A slow, spreading look of wonder crossed the boy's face. His eyes went wide. He had never tasted anything like this. Chocolate had not existed in Japan for years. All sugar, all sweetness had been reserved for the military. And now here it was, offered freely by the enemy, by the demon. Yuki watched her mind reeling, her entire understanding of the universe fracturing like ice under a hammer. The demon did not snatch the child and devour him. The demon did not bare fangs dripping with blood. The demon gave the boy chocolate and smiled. In that single quiet moment, 14 years of propaganda, a universe of carefully constructed fear and hatred, began to dissolve. The world Yuki had been taught to believe in was crumbling, falling apart in the sweet foreign taste of chocolate on a child's tongue. She looked at the American soldiers again, really looked at them, and a new feeling more terrifying than fear began to stir in her chest. It was not hatred. It was not even anger. It was curiosity. Dizzying, dangerous, irresistible curiosity. Who were these men? These demons who gave candy to children? The occupation had begun, but it would not be the occupation anyone expected. September 1945. The Ginza district, Tokyo. 3 weeks after the surrender, the Ginza was a ghost of its former self. The once glittering department stores with their imported French perfumes and English woolens were now hollow concrete tombs. Windows blown out by firebombs gaped like empty eye sockets. Neon signs hung askew or lay shattered in the streets. Piles of rubble lined the boulevards where elegant women had once paraded in silk kimonos and fashionable Western dresses. Now the only color in the gray landscape came from the Americans. Their olive-drab jeeps were everywhere, bouncing over broken pavement, weaving through crowds of silent pedestrians. The men of the United States 8th Army had transformed the city into their own sprawling barracks. They were a force of nature, loud, confident, utterly unconcerned with the ancient protocols of Japanese society that had governed every interaction for 1,000 years. They whistled. They laughed from deep in their bellies. They called out to each other across the street, their voices booming with a resonant energy that seemed to shake the very air. They took up space without apology. They existed loudly. For 22-year-old Fumiko Sato, the Americans were beings from another reality. She moved through the ruins of the Ginza like a ghost herself. Thin, too thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin that had not seen good nutrition in 4 years. She wore the standard wartime uniform that all women had been required to adopt. Baggy Monpee trousers, a faded cotton jacket, no makeup, no jewelry, no adornment of any kind. The militarists had stripped femininity away, declared it frivolous and unpatriotic. Women were meant to be useful, not beautiful. Functional, not decorative. Fumiko carried a small cloth bundle containing 3 hand-embroidered handkerchiefs, a porcelain teacup with only one tiny chip, and a silk scarf her mother had owned. She was going to the black market near Ueno Park to trade them for sweet potatoes. If she was lucky, maybe a small bag of rice. This was what life had become, trading away the last beautiful things for enough calories to survive another week. She had lost her fiancé Takeshi at Okinawa. He had been 24, a gentleman who wrote poetry and dreamed of opening a bookstore after the war. He died in April, torn apart by American naval bombardment, his body never recovered. She had lost her older brother at Iwo Jima, burned alive in a cave by American flamethrowers. She had lost her home in the firebombing of Tokyo in March. The entire neighborhood consumed in a single night of flame that turned the sky red and the air into a furnace. She had lost everything except her younger sister Keiko and her father. Her father, Hiroshi Sato, had been an officer in the Imperial Army, a true believer. He had survived the war only to find himself living in a nation that no longer existed. The Emperor had been revealed as mortal. The divine mission had failed. The sacrifice of millions had purchased only defeat and occupation. Hiroshi did not speak of these things. He barely spoke at all anymore. He sat in their cramped shack on the outskirts of the city and stared at nothing, a man hollowed out by grief and shame. Fumiko turned a corner and froze. An American jeep sat parked outside what had once been a cafe. The building's facade was scorched black, but someone had rigged up a makeshift awning. A soldier stood beside the jeep, bent over the engine compartment, tools in hand. He was working on something mechanical, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. A radio in the jeep crackled to life. Music poured out into the ruined street. Not the mournful, patriotic dirges that had been the only approved music in Japan for years. Not the traditional shakuhachi flute or the formal, rigid melodies of court music. This was something else entirely. A clarinet, bright and brassy and impossibly alive. Then a trumpet joined in, and drums, and a whole orchestra of sound that seemed to grab the air itself and shake it. The rhythm was a physical thing. It bypassed the brain and went straight for the hips, the feet, the heart. It spoke of improvisation, of joy, of a world where bodies were meant for dancing, not for sacrifice. Benny Goodman. Swing music. The sound of America. Fumiko and her sister Keiko, who had been walking a few steps behind both, stopped dead in their tracks. Keiko was only 16, but she looked younger. Hunger had stolen the bloom from her cheeks. Still, her eyes lit up at the sound of the music. They widened with something that looked dangerously close to hope. The American soldier straightened up from the engine. He was young, maybe 23 or 24. Tall, of course. They were all tall. But there was something different about this one. He wore a battered Stetson hat pushed back on his head. His uniform sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms tanned dark by the sun and corded with muscle. When he moved, there was a looseness in his hips, a rolling gait that reminded Fumiko of nothing so much as the cowboys in the old Western films. He caught sight of Fumiko and Keiko staring. For a moment, his eyes met Fumiko's. They were blue, impossibly blue, like the sky over Mount Fuji before the war, when the air was still clean and the world still made sense. He smiled. Not a leer, not a predatory grin, just a simple, open, friendly smile. Then he nodded his head slightly, almost a bow, and turned back to his work. His head bobbed in time with the music. Fumiko stood frozen, her heart hammered in her chest. This man, this American, this enemy who had helped kill her fiancé and her brother, looked like the most alive thing she had seen in 4 years. He looked healthy, fed, content. He looked like he had never known a day of real suffering in his entire life. He looked, she realized with a shock that felt like falling, like the boy next door. If the boy next door was a giant from a land of impossible plenty. The song on the radio was Sing, Sing, Sing. The clarinets soared and dove. The drums pounded with relentless energy. It was music that demanded movement, demanded life, demanded joy. Keiko tugged on Fumiko's sleeve, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. They should leave. They should not be standing here staring at an American soldier. People would talk. People already talked about any woman who came within 10 feet of the occupiers. But Fumiko could not move. The American finished whatever he was doing under the hood and slammed it shut. He wiped his hands on a rag, then reached into his pocket. For one absurd moment, Fumiko thought of the boy and the chocolate at Atsugi Airfield. He pulled out a stick of gum. Wrigley's spearmint. The green wrapper caught the weak autumn sunlight. He unwrapped it, put it in his mouth and began to chew. Then, as if on impulse, he pulled out another stick and walked toward them. Fumiko's breath caught. Keiko took a half-step back. The American stopped a respectful distance away. He held out the gum. His face was open, friendly, no threat in his eyes, just simple human kindness. He said something in English. The words were gibberish to Fumiko, but the tone was gentle. Offering. Then he tried Japanese, badly mangled, but recognizable. For you. Gift. No problem. Fumiko stared at the gum, at this small, trivial thing that represented everything her world had lost. Sweetness. Pleasure for its own sake. The casual abundance of a nation that could afford to chew something that had no nutritional value whatsoever. Her hand moved before her brain gave permission. She reached out, took the gum. Her fingers brushed his for a fraction of a second. His skin was warm. "Thank you," she whispered in English. One of the few phrases she remembered from school before English had been banned as the language of the enemy. The American's smile widened. He touched the brim of his Stetson in a gesture that was pure cowboy, pure Western, pure American. Then he turned and climbed back into his Jeep. The engine roared to life. He drove away, the swing music fading into the distance. Fumiko stood in the ruins of the Ginza, holding a stick of Wrigley's spearmint gum, her entire world shifting beneath her feet. Keiko stared at her, then at the gum. "Sister," she whispered, "you took it." Fumiko unwrapped the gum slowly. The scent of peppermint hit her like a memory of a world before the war. She put it in her mouth. The flavor exploded on her tongue. Sweet, cool, impossibly fresh. It was the first thing she had tasted in 4 years that existed purely for pleasure, not for survival, not for duty, just for the simple, radical act of enjoyment. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Sister!" Keiko's voice was frightened now. "Are you crying?" Fumiko was crying, but she was also smiling, because in that moment, chewing American gum in the ruins of Tokyo, she understood something fundamental and terrifying. The propaganda had been a lie. These men were not demons, they were not monsters, they were just men. Men with chocolate and gum and music and smiles. Men who had everything. Men who represented a world so different from her own that it might as well have been a different planet. And that world, that impossible, abundant, free world, was suddenly closer than it had ever been, close enough to taste, close enough to want, close enough to destroy everything she had left if she was not careful. That night, Fumiko returned to the shack she shared with her father and sister. The structure was little more than salvaged wood and corrugated metal, one of thousands that had sprung up in the burned-out districts. Hiroshi sat in his usual spot, staring at the wall. He did not look up when she entered. Keiko busied herself preparing their meager dinner. Watery soup made from daikon radish and a few grains of rice. Fumiko hid the gum wrapper in her shoe. She did not know why she kept it, only that she could not bear to throw it away. As she lay on her thin sleeping mat that night, she thought about the American soldier, about his blue eyes and his easy smile, about the way he moved through the world without fear or shame, about the music that had poured from his jeep like liquid gold. She thought about Takeshi, her dead fiancé, about the last letter he had sent her from Okinawa, stained with mud and written in a shaky hand. He had known he was going to die. He had asked her to remember him, to honor his sacrifice. And here she was, less than 6 months after his death, thinking about an American soldier, the enemy, a man whose bombs and bullets had killed the man she was supposed to marry. The guilt was a physical weight on her chest. But beneath the guilt, something else stirred, something she had not felt since before the war, something dangerous and intoxicating and utterly forbidden. Hope. What would happen when the Japanese women met the American cowboys? When propaganda collided with reality? When hunger met abundance? When defeat met generosity? The answer would change 50,000 lives. It would create families that spanned 2 nations. It would transform both the conquered and the conquerors in ways neither could predict. But first, Fumiko Sato would have to decide if she had the courage to choose life over grief, to choose the future over the past, to choose the cowboy with the blue eyes and the easy smile over the ghost of the man she had lost. That choice would cost her everything she had left, and it would give her a life she never knew was possible. The American's name was Jake Morrison. Fumiko learned this 3 days later when he found her again at the black market near Ueno Park. She was bargaining with a toothless old woman over the price of sweet potatoes when she heard the familiar rumble of a jeep engine. She turned, and there he was, the cowboy, leaning against his vehicle with that same easy posture, that same slight smile. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Interest, certainly, but something else too, something that looked almost like loneliness. When their eyes met, he straightened up, walked toward her with that rolling gait, his boots crunching on the broken pavement. He stopped a respectful distance away and took off his Stetson, holding it against his chest, a gesture of respect that was utterly foreign to Japanese men, but somehow felt right. "Ma'am," he said in his rough, fractured Japanese, "you remember me, gum man?" Despite herself, despite everything, Fumiko smiled. It was a small smile, hesitant and scared, but it was real. The first genuine smile she had managed since the surrender. "Yes," she said in careful English. "I remember." His face lit up like sunrise over Mount Fuji. "You speak English. That's wonderful. That's just wonderful." He introduced himself properly then. Corporal Jake Morrison, 23 years old, from Montana, a place Fumiko could not even imagine. He was with the 1st Cavalry Division, he explained. Not fighting cavalry anymore, of course, but they still kept horses. 200 of them shipped over for military police patrols. Jake was a horse trainer, had grown up on a ranch, been riding since before he could walk. "Folks back home call me Cowboy," he said with a sheepish grin. "I know it's not original, but it's stuck." Fumiko found herself talking to him. Really talking. Not the careful, formal Japanese conversation she had been trained in since childhood, but something looser, more honest. She told him her name, that she lived with her father and sister, that she worked odd jobs to buy food. She did not tell him about Takeshi. She did not tell him about her brother. Those wounds were too raw, too dangerous to expose to this man who represented everything that had killed them. Jake listened with an attention that was almost painful in its intensity. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. He treated her words like they mattered, like she mattered. When she finished, he reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a stick of Wrigley's spearmint and a small card with an address written on it in surprisingly neat handwriting. Hibiya Park, he said, pointing to the card. Saturday, 7 in the evening. There's a dance hall, American music, good music. You come. Fumiko stared at the card, at this absurd invitation, at this impossible suggestion that she, a Japanese woman in mourning, would go dancing with an American soldier, with the enemy. It was unthinkable. It was scandalous. It was the kind of thing that would get her labeled a pan-pan girl, a prostitute, a traitor to her race and her nation. She should say no. She should walk away. She should never see this cowboy again. Instead, she took the card, slipped it into her pocket before Keiko, who was watching from a distance with wide eyes, could see clearly what it was. "Maybe," Fumiko whispered, "maybe I come." Jake's smile could have powered the city. "I'll be waiting, Ma'am. I surely will." He climbed back into his jeep and drove away, leaving Fumiko standing in the ruins with her heart pounding and her mind racing and a small white card burning in her pocket like a brand. The next 3 days were torture. Fumiko hid the card in her shoe just like the gum wrapper. Every step reminded her it was there. Every step felt like walking toward a cliff edge. Keiko knew something was wrong. She watched Fumiko with the sharp eyes of a younger sister who had learned to read danger during 4 years of war. "You're thinking about him," Keiko said on Friday night as they prepared for bed. "The American, the cowboy." Fumiko did not deny it. There was no point. Keiko saw everything. "If you go," Keiko said quietly, "Father will find out. You know he will. The neighbors talk. The old women watch everything. I know. He will be angry, more than angry. I know." Keiko was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Fumiko's hand, squeezed it tight. "Takeshi is dead, sister. Your fiancé is dead. Our brother is dead. Half the men in Japan are dead. But you are alive. You deserve to feel alive too." Fumiko looked at her baby sister, this 16-year-old girl who had grown old too fast, and felt tears burn behind her eyes. "You think I should go?" "I think," Keiko said carefully, "that life is for the living, and I think that cowboy looks at you like you are the sun." Saturday came. Fumiko told her father she was visiting a sick aunt across the city. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but she told it anyway. Hiroshi barely acknowledged her. He sat in his corner staring at nothing, lost in whatever private hell occupied his mind. Keiko helped her prepare. They had almost nothing, but Keiko was resourceful. She had saved a stub of pencil and used it to darken Fumiko's eyebrows. She had found a tiny pot of rouge on the black market, traded for it with the last of their mother's jewelry, and now she applied it to Fumiko's lips and cheeks with careful fingers. The dress was the hardest part. Fumiko had nothing suitable. Everything she owned was either shapeless wartime clothing or kimonos too formal and traditional for a dance hall. In the end, Keiko produced a miracle. She had been saving scraps of an old parachute, pure white silk, and she had sewn them together into a simple Western-style dress. It was not perfect. The seams were crooked in places, the hem was uneven, but it was beautiful. It made Fumiko look like a woman again instead of a ghost. "You look like the pictures in the American magazines," Keiko whispered. like a movie star. Fumiko looked at herself in the cracked mirror they had salvaged from the ruins. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Thin, yes, still too thin. But there was color in her cheeks now, light in her eyes. She looked for the first time in 4 years like someone who might have a future. She slipped out of the shack while her father dozed, walked through the darkening streets toward Hibiya Park. Every step felt like a betrayal and a liberation at the same time. The dance hall had been a restaurant before the war. Now it was a hastily repaired building with plywood covering the shattered windows and a hand-painted sign in English and Japanese. Music poured out into the street, impossibly loud, impossibly joyful. Glenn Miller, In the Mood. The brass section hit like a physical force. Fumiko stood outside, frozen with terror and anticipation. Through the door she could see glimpses of the interior. Electric lights bright as day, American soldiers in clean uniforms, and Japanese women, dozens of them, some in kimonos, some in Western dresses, all of them dancing, laughing, moving to the music with an abandon that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. She almost turned back, almost ran. But then she saw him. Jake stood just inside the doorway watching the street, waiting. He wore a clean uniform pressed sharp. His Stetson was in his hands. When he saw her, his entire face transformed. He strode out to meet her, moving fast now, all cowboy swagger and barely contained excitement. "You came," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I wasn't sure you would. I was afraid maybe I'd dreamed you." "I came," Fumiko whispered. "I do not know why, but I came." He offered his arm, a gesture from old movies from a different world. Fumiko hesitated only a moment before taking it. His arm was solid beneath her hand. Real, warm, alive. They stepped into the hall together, and Fumiko's breath caught in her throat. Light. That was what hit her first. Electric lights everywhere, blazing like 1,000 stars. The war had been years of darkness, of blackouts and cowering in shelters while bombs fell. This was the opposite of all that. This was light, without apology, without fear. The air smelled of tobacco and perfume, and something else she could not identify. Possibility, maybe. Hope. The photograph crackled and hissed, then erupted with the propulsive beat of the music. The floor was packed with couples spinning and swaying and moving with an energy that seemed to defy gravity. "You know how to dance?" Jake asked. Fumiko shook her head. She knew traditional Japanese dance, formal and controlled. But this wild, improvised physical celebration, no, never. "Then I'll teach you," Jake said simply. He led her onto the floor. He put one hand on her waist. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. In traditional Japanese society, men and women did not touch in public. Ever. This was scandalous. This was forbidden. This was the most alive Fumiko had felt since before the war. Jake took her other hand in his. "Just follow my lead," he said. "Don't think. Just feel the music." The song was In the Mood, fast, complex, demanding. Jake moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his body flowing with the rhythm. He spun, Fumiko guided her, held her when she stumbled. She was clumsy at first, her feet tangling her body, stiff with self-consciousness. But gradually, something shifted. The music seeped into her bones. Her hips began to move on their own. Her feet found the rhythm. She was dancing, really dancing. Her body pressed against his, their hands clasped, spinning in circles that made the room blur into streaks of light and color. She was laughing. When had she started laughing? The sound bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, somewhere she thought had died at Okinawa. Jake was laughing too, his blue eyes bright with joy. "You're a natural," he shouted over the music. "A natural dancer." The song ended. The photograph needle hissed. For a moment the dancers paused, catching their breath, the hall filled with happy, breathless chatter. Fumiko stood in Jake's arms, her heart pounding, her cheeks flushed, her entire body singing with sensation. This was wrong. This was a betrayal. She should be in mourning. She should be honoring the dead. But the dead were dead. And she was alive. 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 Jake led her to the side of the room, produced a glass bottle from somewhere ice cold and beaded with condensation. A Coca-Cola. He opened it with a casual twist and handed it to her. Fumiko stared at the bottle, at this perfect glass object in a world of broken pottery and salvaged metal. She took a sip. The cold, sweet fizz exploded on her tongue. It was like drinking lightning, like swallowing joy. She had never tasted anything like it. "Good?" Jake asked. "Good." Fumiko agreed and took another sip. The carbonation made her nose tingle, made her want to laugh again. They sat on a bench against the wall. Jake talked. He had an easy way with words, a natural storytelling gift. He told her about Montana, about land so vast you could ride for days and never see another human soul, about sky so big it swallowed you whole, about grass that stretched to the horizon, green in summer, gold in fall, about horses running free across the plains. He told her about his mother's cooking, apple pie with cinnamon and butter, pot roast that fell apart on the fork, fresh bread every morning. He described flavors Fumiko had never imagined, abundance she could not comprehend. He did not talk about the war, did not mention the fighting, the death, the destruction. It was as if they had agreed without words to pretend none of that existed. To live for a few hours in a world where only music and dancing and cold Coca-Cola mattered. But Fumiko knew the truth. She could see it in the shadows that sometimes crossed Jake's face when he thought she was not looking. He had killed. He had watched friends die. He carried his own ghosts just as she did. Maybe that was why this felt right. Two broken people trying to find wholeness in each other. The photograph operator, a grinning private from Texas, dropped the needle on another record. The opening bars of Chattanooga Choo Choo filled the room. Couples surged back onto the floor. Jake stood, offered his hand. "One more dance." Fumiko took his hand. Let him pull her to her feet. Let him spin her into the music again. This time, she did not think, did not analyze, did not worry about what it meant, or what people would say, or what her father would do when he found out. She just danced, just lived. Just let herself be 22 years old and alive, and held in the arms of a man who looked at her like she mattered. The night wore on, song after song, dance after dance. Sometime around midnight, a girl near the stage, her face flushed with excitement and forbidden joy, called out in halting, practiced English. "Please!" She shouted, her voice clear in a sudden gap between songs. "Music, please don't stop." The phrase hung in the air. A desperate plea. A prayer to keep this bubble of light and life from bursting, to hold back the grey silence of defeat and mourning and loss. Fumiko looked at Jake's face, at his open, honest, kind expression, at the way he smiled at her like she was precious. And she understood with perfect clarity what that girl was really asking for. "Please don't let this end. Please don't let the war come back. Please let us keep this feeling, this music, this hope. Please let us believe, even if just for tonight, that the world might contain more than just suffering, that life might be more than just survival. Please don't stop." The GI at the photograph grinned and dropped the needle on another record. The brassy introduction to Sing 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 filled the room. The clarinet soared, the drums thundered. The dance began again, a frantic, joyous celebration against the encroaching night. Jake pulled Fumiko close, closer than was proper, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through his uniform, close enough that she could smell soap and clean cotton and something uniquely him. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said quietly, his lips close to her ear so she could hear him over the music. "I am glad too," Fumiko admitted. It was the truth. God help her, it was the truth. They danced until the hall closed at 2 in the morning, until her feet ached and her legs trembled with exhaustion and her face hurt from smiling. Jake walked her home, or as close to home as she dared let him come. They stopped 3 blocks from her shack in the shadow of a burned-out shrine. "Can I see you again?" Jake asked. Fumiko knew she should say no, knew this was madness, knew she was playing with fire that would burn her alive. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, you can." Jake's smile was brilliant, even in the darkness. He touched the brim of his Stetson in that gesture that was becoming familiar. That was becoming dear. "Good night, Fumiko," he said, using her given name, an intimacy that made her shiver. "Good night, cowboy," she replied. She watched him walk away into the night, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows. Then she turned and walked the last 3 blocks to her shack, her heart full of music and light and terror. Keiko was waiting up. She took one look at Fumiko's face and smiled, said nothing, just pulled her sister close in a hug. Fumiko crawled onto her sleeping mat, exhausted and exhilarated and more alive than she had felt in years. Outside, Tokyo slept. The ruins dreamed of what they had been. The occupation continued. And somewhere in the city, a cowboy from Montana lay in his bunk and thought about a Japanese woman with sad, beautiful eyes who danced like she was trying to outrun her ghosts. Neither of them knew yet what they had started. Neither understood the price they would pay or the gift they would receive. They only knew that when the music played and they held each other, the war disappeared. The past released its grip, and for a few precious hours anything seemed possible. Even love, even forgiveness, even a future. October became a fever dream of stolen moments and growing danger. Fumiko saw Jake 4, sometimes 5 times a week now. The lies to her father grew more elaborate, more desperate. She was visiting sick friends, running errands for neighbors, helping at a community kitchen that did not exist. Hiroshi barely listened. He sat in his corner staring at the wall, a man already dead inside. He did not notice his daughter slipping away because he had already slipped away himself. But Tokyo noticed. Tokyo always noticed. The whispers started small. A neighbor seeing Fumiko climb into a jeep. A shopkeeper watching her walk down the street smelling of foreign soap. The old women who ruled the black market with iron gossip began to talk. And in a city starving for anything to chew on besides radishes and shame, the story of Fumiko Sato and her American cowboy became a feast. Jake felt it too. The looks from his fellow soldiers, the jokes that started friendly and turned sharp. One night in the barracks, a private from Georgia cornered him by the latrines. "Heard you got yourself a Jap girl, Morrison." Jake kept his face neutral. "I'm seeing someone." "Yes." "You know what they're calling her on base, Tokyo Rose Jr.? Say she's probably feeding you pillow talk to send back to the Emperor." The private laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My brother died at Guadalcanal, killed by Japs, and here you are playing house with one." Jake's fists clenched. "The war's over. For you, maybe. Some of us got longer memories." Jake walked away before he did something that would earn him a court-martial. But the encounter left a sour taste in his mouth. He had thought naively, perhaps, that peace meant forgiveness. He was learning it only meant the shooting had stopped. The breaking point came on a cold afternoon in late October. Fumiko was at the market near Ueno, trading the last of her mother's hair ornaments for rice. She was counting the meager grains the merchant offered when she heard her name. Not spoken. Spat. She turned. 3 women stood behind her. Old women, their faces carved into masks of righteous fury by years of war and loss. She recognized one of them, Mrs. Takahashi, the woman who had lived 2 houses down before the firebombing, the woman who had lost all 3 of her sons, one at Midway, one in the Philippines, one in the fire raids over Tokyo. "Fumiko Sato," Mrs. Takahashi said, her voice carrying across the market. "Or should I say the Americans' whore?" The market went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every transaction froze. All eyes turned to watch. Fumiko felt her face burn. "Mrs. Takahashi, please." "Please!" The old woman's laugh was a bitter caw. "You beg me for mercy when you show none to the memory of your brother, your fiancé. My sons died fighting the Americans. Your brother burned alive because of them, and you repay their sacrifice by spreading your legs for the enemy." "The war is over," Fumiko whispered, but her voice had no strength. "The war is never over." Mrs. Takahashi stepped closer. "Not while traitors like you dishonor the dead. Look at you. You reek of their soap, their perfume. You dress like them. You probably think like them now too. You are not Japanese anymore. You are nothing. Pan, prostitute, filth." The other women joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of condemnation. A crowd gathered. Some faces showed pity. Most showed agreement. A few showed the cruel satisfaction of watching someone else get torn apart. Fumiko stood frozen, drowning in shame and rage and helplessness. She wanted to defend herself, wanted to scream that she had a right to happiness, that the dead did not own her future, that love was not betrayal. But the words would not come, because part of her, the part that still honored Takeshi's memory, still grieved her brother, agreed with them. She was a traitor. She had chosen the enemy, and no amount of love could change that simple, terrible truth. She ran, dropped the rice she had just bought, and ran through the market, through the streets, tears streaming down her face. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, collapsing finally behind a burned-out factory. She did not know how long she sat there, sobbing into her hands. Time lost meaning. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened, and still she sat, drowning in shame. "Sister." Fumiko looked up. Keiko stood there, breathless from running, her face pale with worry. "I heard what happened," Keiko said softly. She sat down beside Fumiko in the rubble, heedless of the dirt on her only good skirt. "Mrs. Nakamura from the vegetable stall told me." "They hate me," Fumiko whispered. "Everyone hates me." "Yes," Keiko agreed. There was no point in lying. "They hate you because you are brave enough to choose happiness, because you remind them that they are too afraid to do the same." "I am not brave. I am selfish. Takeshi died for Japan, and I dishonor his memory by loving an American." Keiko took her sister's hand. "Takeshi died because old men started a war they could not finish. His death was not a gift to you. It was not a chain binding you to grief forever. He loved you, sister. If he could speak, do you think he would want you to die inside too?" Fumiko had no answer. She had asked herself this question 1,000 times in the dark hours before dawn. She had imagined conversations with Takeshi's ghost, seeking his permission, his blessing, his forgiveness. But the dead do not speak. They only haunt. "I do not know," she finally said. "I only know that when I am with Jake, I feel alive. And I am so tired of feeling dead." Keiko squeezed her hand. Then live, sister. Live for both of us. They sat together as the sun set, two sisters in the ruins of their world, holding on to each other because there was nothing else left to hold. Early November brought the first real cold, and with it, a crisis. Fumiko woke one morning and knew immediately that something was wrong. Her body felt different, strange. She counted back the days since her last monthly bleeding and felt ice water flood her veins. She was late, 2 weeks late. She thought of that night on the hill overlooking Tokyo. The jeep, Jake's hands on her skin, the stars overhead, the moment she had given him everything. Pregnant. She might be pregnant. Terror seized her. An unmarried woman with a child was already a scandal. An unmarried woman with a mixed-race child fathered by the enemy was something else entirely. She would be completely cast out. Her father would disown her. Even Keiko might not be able to stand by her. And Jake, what would he do? Would he marry her out of obligation? Would he resent her? Would he think she had trapped him? She could not tell anyone, could not share this fear. So she carried it alone, a growing weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She went to a doctor, a Japanese man who had reopened his clinic near the American base. He looked at her with thinly veiled disgust when she explained her situation. When she asked if she might be pregnant, he refused to examine her. "I do not treat women who consort with the occupiers," he said coldly. "Go to an American doctor. Let them deal with the consequences of your choices." She fled the clinic in tears, went to another doctor, and another. Each turned her away. The message was clear. She had chosen the Americans. Now she could face American consequences. A week passed, the longest week of her life. She could not eat, could not sleep. Every moment was consumed with fear and calculation. If she was pregnant, what would she do? Where would she go? How would she survive? And then, finally, mercifully, her bleeding came. Late, but it came. She was not pregnant. The relief was overwhelming. She locked herself in the tiny latrine behind their shack and cried for an hour. Cried with relief and disappointment and confusion, because part of her, she realized, had wanted it to be true. Had wanted that excuse, that push, that undeniable reason to choose Jake without guilt. But it was a reprieve, not a solution. And it taught her something terrifying. She was not in control. Her body, her future, her fate, all balanced on a knife's edge. One mistake, one moment of passion, and everything would shatter beyond repair. She had to make a choice. Soon. Before the choice was made for her. She was still shaking with leftover fear when Jake found her 3 days later at their usual meeting spot. He took one look at her face and knew something was desperately wrong. What happened? She told him everything, about the market, about Mrs. Takahashi and the accusations, about the doctors who refused to see her, about the week of terror thinking she was pregnant. She told him in a rush, the words tumbling out like a confession, like a plea. Jake listened in silence. His face grew harder with each sentence. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I am so sorry you have to face this alone. I am sorry I cannot protect you from their hate." "It is not your fault, isn't it?" He pulled back, looked at her with those impossibly blue eyes. "I knew what would happen if we started this. I knew what it would cost you, and I was selfish enough to ask anyway." "I chose too," Fumiko said. "I am not a victim. I chose you." "Then choose again," Jake said. "Right now, because I have something to tell you, and after I tell you, there is no going back." Fumiko's heart stopped. Here it was, the moment she had been dreading. He was leaving, returning to America. This had all been a beautiful temporary dream, and now the waking came. But Jake did not let go of her hands. Instead, he dropped to one knee right there in the ruins of the burned shrine, heedless of the mud and broken stone. "I received orders," he said. "I am being reassigned, not home, not yet. They are sending me to Berlin. The occupation there needs horse trainers. I ship out February 15th. 3 months. They had 3 months left. But here is the thing," Jake continued, and now his voice shook. "Congress passed a law 2 weeks ago, the War Brides Act. It allows servicemen to bring foreign wives back to America, to sponsor them for citizenship. Legal, permanent, real." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, opened it. Inside was a ring. Simple silver band with a chip of diamond so small it was almost invisible. A corporal's ring, bought on a corporal's salary. But in the weak November light, it shone like a promise. "Fumiko Sato, I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment you took that gum from my hand and looked at me like I was crazy. I know I am asking the impossible. I know what you would have to give up, your family, your country, your language, everything you have ever known. I know the price is terrible." He paused, swallowed hard. "But I am asking anyway. Marry me. Come to America. Be my wife. Build a life with me in Montana, where nobody knows about the war, where we can just be Jake and Fumiko, 2 people trying to be happy. I cannot promise it will be easy. I cannot promise my family will accept you right away, or that the neighbors will not stare, or that you will not be lonely and homesick. But I promise I will love you every day. I promise I will stand beside you against whatever comes. And I promise that in America you can be more than a widow or a sister or a daughter. You can be yourself." Fumiko stared at the ring, at this tiny circle of metal that represented a door to another world, another life, another self. She thought about her father, hollowed out by grief. About Keiko, who would be left alone. About Takeshi's ghost and her brother's memory. About Mrs. Takahashi's hate-filled eyes and the doctors who turned her away and the city that saw her as nothing but a traitor and a whore. She thought about Jake's hands gentle on her skin, about swing music and Coca-Cola and hamburgers and horses, about Montana, a place she could not imagine but desperately wanted to see, about a future where she could walk down a street without shame, where she could love without permission, where she could simply be, the dead or the living, the past or the future, duty or desire. In the end, it was not even a choice. Not really. Because she had already chosen that first day in the Ginza when she took the gum. Every moment since had just been walking the path that choice had opened. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will marry you." Jake surged to his feet and kissed her, really kissed her deep and desperate and full of relief and joy and terror. The ring slipped onto her finger too large, loose enough that she would have to be careful not to lose it. But it was there, real, a physical symbol of an impossible promise. They spent that night on the hill again under the stars, made love with a fierce intensity born of relief and decision and the knowledge that the hardest part was yet to come. Afterward, Jake talked about Montana, about teaching her to ride, about the ranch where he grew up, the vast sky, the mountains in the distance, about his mother who made the best apple pie in 3 counties, about his 3 sisters who would probably smother Fumiko with questions and affection. Fumiko listened and tried to imagine herself in that world, tried to see a future Fumiko, American Fumiko, cowboy wife Fumiko. The image would not quite come into focus, but she wanted it. God, she wanted it. When Jake dropped her off 3 blocks from home, dawn was breaking. Fumiko walked slowly, the ring hidden in her pocket, because she could not yet bear to put it on her finger where it would be seen. Her body ached pleasantly. Her heart was full of joy and terror in equal measure. She opened the door to the shack as quietly as possible. Her father sat waiting in the dim light of a single candle. Beside him, Keiko stood with tears streaming silently down her face. Her eyes met Fumiko's, and in them was an apology and a plea for forgiveness. Fumiko understood immediately. Father had forced it out of her, had broken her sweet sister to get the truth. "So," Hiroshi said, his voice deadly calm, "my daughter returns at dawn, reeking of him." Fumiko said nothing. There was nothing to say. No lie that would work. No explanation that would matter. Hiroshi stood slowly. In the candlelight he looked ancient, a relic from a dead world. "I have suspected for weeks, but I told myself no. Not my Fumiko, not my good daughter. She would not betray her brother's memory. She would not dishonor her fiancé's sacrifice. She would not choose the enemy over her own blood." He crossed the small room in 3 strides. His hand lashed out, catching Fumiko across the face with a crack that echoed in the tiny space. The blow snapped her head to the side. She tasted blood. It was the first time he had ever struck her. The first and the last. "You disgrace everything," Hiroshi said, his voice shaking now with suppressed rage. "Your ancestors, your family, your nation. You are not Japanese. You are nothing. A whore, a traitor, garbage." Fumiko touched her stinging cheek. The ring in her pocket felt like it was burning. She pulled it out, slipped it onto her finger where it belonged, held up her hand so her father could see. "He asked me to marry him," she said quietly, "and I said yes. I am going to America." For 1 second, Hiroshi's mask cracked. She saw the man beneath. The father who had carried her on his shoulders when she was small. The man who had loved her mother with quiet devotion. The human being drowning in grief and rage and helplessness. She saw him see her, really see her, and understand that he was losing her. Then the mask slammed back. Stone. Unyielding. Final. "Then you are no daughter of mine. Get out. Take your things and get out. If you return, I will report you to the authorities as a prostitute. I will have you arrested. I will destroy you. Do you understand? You are dead to me. Get out." Keiko sobbed. "Father, please." Silence. Hiroshi rounded on his younger daughter. "And you knew. You helped her. You are lucky I do not cast you out as well." Fumiko moved quickly, gathered her few possessions, the parachute dress Keiko had made, the photograph of their mother, the bar of ivory soap. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else fit in the small bundle she could carry. Keiko threw herself at Fumiko, wrapped her arms around her sister. "Don't go," she sobbed. "Please don't leave me here alone with him." This was the knife in the heart, not her father's rejection, not the city's hate. This, abandoning her baby sister to darkness. Fumiko held Keiko and felt her soul tear in half. "I have to," she whispered. "I have to choose life, Keiko. Please understand. Please forgive me." "I understand," Keiko said through her tears. "I understand, and I hate you for it, and I love you for it, and I will never forgive you, and I forgive you right now. Go, go, before I beg you to stay." Fumiko kissed her sister's forehead, pulled away before her resolve broke, looked one last time at her father's rigid back. "I will write," she said. "Every week. I will tell you about America." Hiroshi said nothing, did not turn, did not acknowledge her existence. Fumiko stepped out into the cold November dawn, closed the door behind her, and started walking toward the American base, toward Jake, toward a future that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Behind her lay everything she had been. Daughter, sister, Japanese woman, widow, all the roles that had defined her since birth. Ahead lay something new, something she would have to invent with every step. Wife, immigrant, American, free. The war between nations had ended with surrender. The war within Fumiko Sato, between duty and desire, between the past and the future, between death and life, had just been decided. But the hardest battles, the loneliest nights, the most painful transformations still lay ahead. She did not know if she was strong enough, did not know if love would be enough to carry her through what was coming. She only knew she had to try. The ship's horn bellowed across Yokohama harbor. April 20th, 1946. USS General W.H. Gordon prepared to carry 800 Japanese women to America. To futures they could not imagine, to lives they would have to invent with every breath. Fumiko stood at the rail, one hand gripping Jake's arm, the other clutching a small bundle. Everything she owned, everything she was taking to the new world. The parachute dress, her mother's photograph, the ivory comb Keiko had pressed into her hands 3 days ago with a whispered blessing and a lifetime of tears. The dock was a sea of faces, families saying goodbye, old women spitting curses, young women waving handkerchiefs. And there, at the very edge of the crowd, 2 figures stood apart from the rest. Her father, her sister. Hiroshi did not move, did not wave, but he was there. After weeks of silence, after disowning her, after striking her and calling her dead, he had come. Keiko clung to his arm, her face wet with tears, her other hand raised in desperate farewell. Fumiko's breath caught. She raised her own hand, waited. For one endless moment, nothing. Then Hiroshi's rigid spine bent, just slightly, just enough. A bow, formal, traditional, final. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but acknowledgement. You existed, you mattered, you were my daughter. The gesture broke something in Fumiko's chest. She sobbed into Jake's shoulder as the ship pulled away from the dock, as Japan grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a line on the horizon, until it disappeared entirely into the grey Pacific. 20 years later, Fumiko would return, would stand beside her father's deathbed in a Tokyo hospital and hear him whisper, "I was wrong. Did he make you happy?" And she would answer, every single day, and watch peace finally settle over his ancient face. But that reconciliation lay 2 decades in the future. That moment of grace would come only after years of silence, of letters returned unopened, of a daughter mourning a father who still lived. On this April morning in 1946, Fumiko knew only that she was sailing toward the unknown, toward Montana and cowboys and a life that terrified and exhilarated her, toward a future she would build with her own hands. Behind her, Japan faded into memory. Ahead, America rose from the waves like a promise, like a threat, like hope itself. She was not alone. 800 women sailed with her. 45,000 more would follow in the years to come. They would be called traitors and whores and bridge builders and pioneers. They would raise children who belonged to 2 worlds and none. They would teach America that the enemy could become family, that hate could transform into love, that the future was always bigger than the past. Fumiko Sato Morrison would live to see her daughter become a doctor. Her grandchildren would speak Japanese and English with equal ease. The cherry blossoms Jake planted at the Montana ranch would bloom every spring, a small piece of Japan thriving in American soil. And when she died at 94, surrounded by 4 generations of a family that existed only because she had the courage to choose life over grief, she would have no regrets. Not one. The occupation of Japan lasted 7 years, but the love stories that began in those ruins would last lifetimes. would create families that spanned oceans, would prove that even in the ashes of the worst war in human history, hope could take root. All it required was courage, and a cowboy who offered gum to a ghost of a woman and saw not an enemy, but a future. The ship sailed west toward the rising sun of America, and Fumiko sailed with it, leaving everything behind to gain everything she never knew she needed.